Welcome, everyone. This is the inaugural lecture series, Gloria Anzaldúa, and it is in reference to Women and Gender Studies Research Excellent Award for faculty. We have 8 scholarships for students, and we also see a need to help our colleagues complete projects that are almost done, but they need an extra push. It's a $1,000 award. You have the deadline listed on the chat. Is December 14th. And there's also the link to where to find it in our page in Women and Gender Studies at College of Arts and Humanities. All you need to do is be a full-time professor at UCF, any category, and to have a project near completion that the committee will look upon and see if it's good to invest in you so that you can actually finish it by July 2nd, 2022. In January 5th, we will announce the winners, and each year we give 2 awards of $1,000 each. And today, we're very happy to present the 2019 winners of the Gloria Anzaldúa, Dr. Shannon Carter and Dr. Beatrice Reyes-Foster. Foster is from anthropology and Carter is from sociology. We're going to have an informal conversation today, so I hope that everyone is comfortable asking questions by raising your hand or writing them in the chat.
Congratulations! Congratulations!
Okay. Since I'm a one-woman show, be patient on me being able to do everything. I wanted to briefly introduce our panelist. Dr. Beatrice Reyes-Foster has a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. She's an associate professor of anthropology. Among her many, many awards, she was inducted in 2021 in the Scroll and Quill Society at UCF. Also this year, she won the UCF Luminary Award. In 2020, she was the University Excellence in Professional Service Award. And in 2019, she received the RIA, among many, many, many other things, including the one award that I want to win. So I'm going to pick your brain later, which is in 2020. In 2015, she won the Chuck Shubin Award for online teaching. Her primary research interest is sociocultural and medical anthropology, and her secondary interest is mothering, infant feeding, breast milk, and breastfeeding. And our second panelist, never least, is Shannon Carter. She has a PhD from the University of Florida in sociology. She's a professor in the Department of Sociology. And I didn't know this about you, that you also run the Women and Gender Studies program at the University of West Georgia. See how I learn when I read CVs? It's good reading. In 2019, she was inducted in the UCF Scroll and Quill Society. She has received in 2019 a TIP award, and in 2013, another TIP award. Stop it, Shannon, stop it. Her areas of research are sociology of reproduction, gender race inequalities, sociology of the body, medical sociology, among others. So without further ado, I would like to leave the floor for our presenters, the 2019 winners of the Gloria Anzaldúa Research Excellence for Faculty Award. How was that?
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great.
We
Congratulations,
just wanted to,
ladies.
Thank you. We wanted to also take a moment to thank you, MC, for running this amazing Women's and Gender Studies program and for providing opportunities like this one to support faculty research, as well as all of the opportunities that you provide for our students. We also want to thank Cecilia for coordinating this event, even though she could not be here today. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day to come and hear us talk about our work. I know this is a very busy time in the semester, so we very much appreciate you spending time with us. We do have a PowerPoint. It only has pictures on it, so it's not boring and filled with words. Am I allowed to screen share? Let's see, it looks like I can.
You should be able to.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Looks great.
PowerPoint. Okay, great. Okay, perfect. So actually, let's see. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague to start us off.
Okay, I am Beatrice Reyes-Foster. Shannon and I first started collaborating on this project back in 2013, and it really all started with coffee and talking about sort of some of our shared interests in reproduction, and I told Shannon I was looking to start a new project, and Shannon was like, well, what I want to do is study milk sharing. And when she said this to me, I said, you can do that? Because it had never crossed my mind. And so what Shannon was talking about is the practice of sharing one's breast milk with someone else. And I, at that point, had one child. I was pregnant with my second, and with my first child, I really struggled to breastfeed. I had a really, really difficult time. I never had enough supply. And about 3 months in, I got so depressed, I just threw in the towel and gave up and, formula fed for the rest of the time. And it had never occurred to me that this was even an option. And it turned out that this was a practice that was unfolding. Really, once I started looking into it and learning more about it, it was unfolding everywhere. It was happening in all kinds of places. And so that's kind of the origin story of this project. Shannon and I started working on it, and it became a 4-year journey for us. And it eventually led to the publication of our book and a whole slew of articles on the topic. I don't know, Shannon, would you add anything?
No, I mean, that's a great introduction. I mean, I guess just to clarify, the actual practice that we're talking about is a very informal one where parents, those who have extra breast milk, and just to also clarify a little further on that, it's not just like laying around extra like in the freezer collecting dust, right? It's a great deal of labor that goes into producing extra breast milk, often just for the purpose of sharing, so feeding someone else's baby. This is something that's unregulated. It's not overseen by any particular entity. And because of that, because it's actually, disproportionately women sharing what's considered to be a bodily fluid, although we could argue that it's simply food, with another person, and the FDA isn't able to control, regulate, or test that, there's a lot of opposition to the practice and warnings against it. And so it was within this context that we wanted to study the practice to sort of clarify what people are actually doing. The medical perception at the time, and possibly still to this day, was that this is people selling milk on the internet, strangers shipping it across the country, right? This unhealthy and contaminated product that's then being fed to babies, and we knew from our interactions in the breastfeeding community that just wasn't what was happening. And so we set out to study it more formally. So that leads us into our approach. So like I said, we came to this project, we met over coffee. I had been involved in Central Florida breastfeeding communities for many years before initiating the project. And I had seen milk sharing sort of unfolding in front of me, right? Like women in breastfeeding support groups, one struggling, one with the ability to produce extra milk, sort of setting up these ongoing long-term relationships with each other, where one would share milk. Many times they were tested, they would share blood work. So I knew that what was happening on the ground was very different than what was being portrayed in the literature, and especially like the newspaper headlines and FDA warnings and things like that. So it worked out well that I was already involved with some of the networks in Central Florida. I live more in like the Lake Mary Sanford area. Beatrice was pregnant and lived in a different part of town. So we had these different networks that we could utilize and sort of bring together in a more systematic way. I had started a nonprofit organization with a group of friends that I met through breastfeeding circles that was focused on supporting breastfeeding in Central Florida. So we had this sort of automatic in these lots of different kinds of events, different networking events. We got to know the lactation consultants in the area, the doulas, the midwives, along with, hundreds of women who were mostly breastfeeding communities, but within that is sort of where the milk sharing networks emerged. So to collect our data, we continued participation and through ethnographic engagement. We did this for 4 years, as sort of the formal amount of time that we count, but it was probably more like 8. And this is both face-to-face and online networks. So we would go to events, we would organize events, we'd have tables at the events. We were invited to the health department. We volunteered at the Mother's Milk Bank of Florida once they opened, and our research started long before there was any kind of milk bank in Florida. We organized big latch-on community events, which brought a couple hundred women together trying to break the world record. This is like an international event of the greatest number of babies to latch on at the same time. So we spent a lot of time and also engaged in online networks as well. So lots of private Facebook groups, lots of sharing memes, sharing advice, things like that. But most of this was very much focused in the Central Florida area. We also conducted an online survey of 392 parents who participated in milk sharing. About 2/3 of the sample were local to Central Florida. This was something that earlier grant reviewers didn't think there was any way we could possibly get 200 participants over the course of 2 years who had shared milk in Florida. That's such an obscure practice that nobody does. We had over 400 people at least start the survey. 392 completed it within a matter of 4 months. Yeah. So again, we knew that this was very common in our area. We were told often that we wouldn't be able to get very many participants. We also did in-depth face-to-face interviews with mothers who were engaging in milk sharing at the time of the interview. So this was we wished it was a broader interdisciplinary collaboration. We actually collected milk from the parents. That part of the project didn't continue, but that was a pretty select group. They had to actually, be sharing milk in that moment. And we met them at coffee shops. We went to their homes. Again, participants, they wanted their stories to be told. So it was very easy to get our 30 participants. I think we completed all of the interviews within the span of 2 months. So people really wanted to have their stories shared.
Yeah, this was something that people felt very passionate about. There was definitely, a very strong commitment to both to giving and to receiving milk. And so we found several things about this practice, and our book really presents both kind of the the description of these practices that that were misconstrued by, not only in the media, but by other researchers. And then we also engaged in a more kind of sociological analysis. And so I'll cover both sides of that. So in the first place, what we found was, well, initially, that many of the misconceptions that we saw in the media, as we kind of had already suspected, there was a very kind of strong assumption made within the mainstream media, and that was connected to some early epidemiological research on milk sharing, that where researchers purchased breast milk online and had it shipped to a PO box, and then had conducted a series of microbiology tests on the milk, and then found that, unsurprisingly, the milk was just teeming with harmful bacteria. And so this particular study, which came out of Ohio State University, actually made the front cover of the Sunday Times. It got a lot of attention. And so a lot of the headlines were like, milk shared online full of bacteria. But when we actually looked at that research, and we realized that, for instance, the fact that this milk had been purchased, one of the things that we observed, and that, we observed it kind of experientially, and then we actually studied it, we found that within these milk sharing communities, commodification was really sharply rebuked. For the most part, people did not engage in selling or buying milk. And there was almost a certain kind of element of suspicion that would emerge when people talked about selling or buying, as if, and introducing a profit motive somehow actually made the milk more suspicious for parents who were seeking donor milk for their babies. And so very often what we saw was that was the establishment of certain kind of informal ways of screening, where potential donors and potential recipients would kind of check each other out prior to moving forward with an exchange. They would kind of look at each other's social media really carefully. Donors really cared that there was an actual baby involved, because apparently human milk is really big in certain elements of bodybuilding communities, for instance. And so bodybuilders will go out and try to obtain human milk because it's seen as a nutritional supplement. And so donors were often really concerned that their milk actually make it to a baby. And so they would request proof that there was a baby. They would often, when they met their recipient, they would actually want to physically see the baby. And likewise, recipients they might request lab work from donors prior to accepting their milk, just to make sure that, for instance, the donor didn't have HIV, which is one of the viruses that can be transmitted through human milk. And so what we found in the reality of the practices around human milk sharing was quite stark when compared to some of the media representations that kind of showed these, reckless mothers playing Russian roulette with their babies' lives, which is literally one of the quotes that appeared in some of this media, playing Russian roulette. And so on the one hand, we were able to find, document, and publish a lot of valuable information about the actual practices of milk sharing as we saw them and as we studied them. And then we also were able to publish on mothers, both donors and recipients, knowledge of safe milk handling guidelines, for instance. And so that also was something that we were able to learn about through our survey data and through our interview data, is what are the kinds of precautions, not only in terms of screening, but also in terms of the actual food handling that the parents and caregivers are engaging in when they are both expressing milk in order to donate, or when they're receiving donor milk. the other side, of course, is sort of like the more theoretical sort of sociological analysis, and so that had to do with community building and with communities of practice. And so after, Shannon and I spent a lot of time analyzing our data. And one of the things that we found was the way in which milk kind of emerged as this fluid that was just value laden, that had tremendous, we talk about bio value and theories of bio value, and the way in which biological materials are infused with a certain kind of monetary value when they're commodified. What we found in this community was what we came to call emotive value, which was the way in which the milk itself becomes infused not with kind of a capitalistic value, but rather with the emotional value of the labor that it goes into the expression of the milk, the production of the milk, the storage, and then the work that mothers go through or caregivers go through just to obtain it, the many hours spent driving from place to place and looking for offers of milk, seeking it out. It's extremely time consuming on both sides, on both the side of the owners and on the side of recipients. And so we came up with this concept that we call emotive value to describe the way in which this milk is valued by the community. And at the same time, we also developed the notion of bio community of practice, which builds on ideas of communities of practice as sort of these goal-oriented learning communities. Within bio communities of practice, we see kind of the importance of the biological material of milk itself and the way in which people enter these communities, are socialized into them, take on different roles within them, and then at another point eventually exit these communities as people move on with their lives and reach that stage where they no longer require milk or they no longer produce it. And so those are some of the key findings in our book.
Great. So we wanted to talk just a little bit about how we used the award. So by the time that we applied for the Gloria Anzaldúa Award, we had already collected all of our data. We had written the first draft of our monograph, and that had been reviewed. So we'd gotten the reviews back. And we were really in those final stages of making revisions to the book and completing the project. So what we applied for, there were still a few things that we needed to do to, to make the book more desirable. One is the photographs that we included, that we shared on the PowerPoint. And so we were able to give incentives to people who contributed their own photographs. These are pictures. They weren't necessarily from our participants, but they were from people in the same kind of communities where we acquired our participants. So some could have been participants, maybe they weren't. We didn't even really know that necessarily. So we were able to give everyone who contributed a photograph a $30 Amazon gift card for their contribution. And then of course they got to have their image featured in our book. So that was sort of exciting on both ends. And we just kind of appreciated being able to give them a token of gratitude, for enhancing the book with images. Secondly, we used the award money to pay for indexing, and we felt like this was a very good use of feminist money in particular, because some publishers like ours expected us to pay them to index our book while they profited off of our labor. So they didn't pay us to write the book, but they felt like it was this very incredible, task to write the index for the book. So we were able to use our award money to pay a private company to do this rather than paying the publisher, which at least we felt like we were supporting a different group and not paying our publishers to publish our book. So we're very grateful for this award, and we encourage you all to apply, and we're open to any questions.
I have a question.
I do have a question also. After Maria.
Okay, no, I was gonna say that in current times of more isolation, does milk sharing become more or less popular among the milk sharing network? Or have you seen it? It's the same.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, because 2020 kind of happened after our project had ended, and we were not really involved in the community anymore. I'm not sure. And a lot of the kind of the virtual spaces where we kind of kept tabs of what was happening in the community kind of became kind of hotbeds of arguments over masking and vaccines, because a lot of the folk who are involved in kind of natural childbirth and natural parenting, a significant number of them are also skeptical of vaccines, and so that kind of took over the groups, at least the ones that I was still a part of. I don't know about you, Shannon, if you had a different experience.
Yeah, that was my experience too. And it was sort of interesting. I mean, we spent years in these communities, and, we sort of felt like we were on the same page with these people with, many things. Although, all of these spaces, midwifery, all natural birth, breastfeeding, milk sharing, these are spaces where extreme right and extreme left come together, but there was common ground. And that was one of the things that we wrote about too in the book, is that people who knew they were on very different ends of the political spectrum, and who knew that, they differed in so many ways, would come together and form these communities for the sake of infant health, right? Which is really what the goal was. And when the narrative shifted to focus more on things like anti-COVID vaccine and anti-masking, and even like disrupting the science about the transmission of COVID-19, we kind of couldn't take it anymore. And so it was really a letdown to finally have this book finished and then not want to really connect with this community at all anymore, because the issues had changed so much. So even like promoting the book, talking about the book, and of course, like, what a natural first question to ask, right? And we're like, we don't really like them anymore.
And I think it wasn't just Shannon and myself. I think that it did do a lot of damage to the communities themselves. I think it tore a lot of these communities apart, because people just, it became so polarized and politicized that it just, it quickly degraded. There's actually some really interesting work that's been done on the ways in which some of these natural parenting communities were sort of taken over by anti-vaxxing movements in very kind of deliberate ways. And so it's, that's a whole other book, I think, that somebody else needs to write.
Okay, Ala, you had a question?
Yeah, I have two questions. Ladies, an interesting research. Really, I'm sorry, I'm not showing myself. I am without makeup. So excuse me, please.
You are feminist.
So the first question, is it only awarded for online?
I'm sorry?
Is it only online is it only online award? You need to do it only online? Like
No, they have an actual book. They published it.
Are you asking about applying to the award? Is the application only online?
Yes, the application is online.
No, I understand that the application is online, but my question is, like, it can be any research, not only online research, right?
Yeah, ours
Yes.
wasn't only online. Our research actually was mostly in person.
Oh, okay. I'm just checking that because I kind of didn't understand. And another question is, why did you use Russian roulette? Russian women love to kind of to
Got in
feed
trouble with the Russian
babies.
representative.
Yeah, that wasn't us. So there was I think it was the president of the Human Milk Banking Association of North America was interviewed about milk sharing by NPR, and that was the expression that she used to describe milk
Okay.
sharing, which is
Okay.
certainly not something that we agree with. But that was the expression she said. Yeah, people that do this are playing Russian roulette with their baby's life.
Okay. Okay. Just checking. Thank you.
I have another question. Can you tell me a couple of positive experiences of writing a book together? Because I usually
Oh.
hear the bad side, like, oh,
Oh, Shannon and I had we've written more than a book. How many articles have we published, Shannon? Like more
10.
than 10.
10.
Yeah, 10.
wow.
Like we love writing together. We're really compatible that way. And we've done this so much that we know kind of when we need to write apart and when we need to come together and actually produce something together. I think that one of the things that really works for us is that we are both sticklers for deadlines. And so when she and I agree that we are going to get X task completed by this date, we both do it. And so we don't run into a situation where one of us is doing all this work and the other one hasn't gotten around to it. I don't know, like Shannon, go ahead. I'm like taking over.
Yeah, no, I mean, all of that. We also, like, I feel like in some ways we're yin and yang. You're great at the vignettes, the storytelling, right? I'm more like bogged down in the details. I'm not a quantitative sociologist at all, but when there are numbers, I do that part. I make sense of things in a more, and so we work very well together in that way. So it's easy to divide up some of the labor. And then when it gets to like the hardest parts, the conceptual breakthroughs, we come together and we write together. And we've had so much fun, so many great, hours and hours at coffee shops, our offices. We met at the park with the kids and they're writing, like wherever we needed to be, our homes. I mean, we just spent hours and hours together and built a great friendship. Our families knew each other. So it's really been an amazing and productive collaboration.
Yeah.
Not every collaboration has been this amazing. and that's why we've been able to be so productive together.
Well, this project is also interdisciplinary and is shared by both of you, but people that apply to the Gloria Anzaldúa do not need to have a partner. They can do an application by themselves. And don't forget that in the past, we have also funded performances, finishing publishing, translating work, copyrights, and traveling to present the findings of a research. The one thing that it has to be very clear is that it has to be near completion. It's not going to be like, oh, I have this idea, I want to collect data. It's going to be like, I already collected data, I'm finishing writing, and I need this. Because the whole idea is to push the research to the final stage. And that's what we think a lot of our colleagues get stuck. Have great idea, have been working on something for a while, but then it doesn't materialize into a deliverable, which is what we really want to with this award. But are there any questions for us? Come on, people.
I have a question.
All right.
It's about the research, actually. I've, in some ways, like I was thinking this, some of this sounds kind of like work that I've read or heard presented about surrogacy, right? The idea that there are these, and that different types of surrogates do this differently. And I don't want to say they're the exact same thing because they're not, right? And I'm wondering about, in that scholarship and when I've seen conversations, there's a lot of concern around like class differences and race differences and exploitative practices where you get, sort of more affluent women who then are, on the surface, and one could argue this looks sort of exploitative of like a poor woman, right, or a low-income woman who's doing this, and of course in those communities there's a lot of work put into like recognizing that and overcoming that challenge, right? And I was wondering if there was like there was sort of like what the kind of demographics of the folks that you're talking about, right, and the communities that you're drawing from, and how they I don't know, like just kind of the basics around like issues of power, and if there's any kind of concern with exploitation, or you already talked about commodification, but just that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a more privileged group in general, from what we know of milk sharing, at least in this form as it takes place. More white, educated, married, heterosexual, stay-at-home moms who are, socioeconomically privileged. There is some research that finds like a slight difference between donors and recipients, where donors are actually maybe even a little bit more privileged than recipients. And so it's a way of, kind of the opposite of exploitation, really a little bit more like a donation, right? I'm going to pass on my children's clothing and then also some milk to help you. Do you want to add to that?
I mean, but I would say that like there's one study that found that kind of very, very slightly significant relationship, and like it didn't bear out in ours. In ours, like there was some variation, like not everyone was white and privileged, but it tended to skew that way. It definitely seems to be like this particular community is just generally privileged, regardless of whether or not you're donating or receiving, and that's why they can afford to not sell it, right? Because they don't need money. What do you see as more kind of development of relationships where a recipient might give the donor a gift card, or will supply or will purchase milk storage bags, which can get expensive, and so like they'll do that. But no, there's definitely like our sample was fairly affluent, educated, and white.
Is there a correlation between affluency and age, or they were in different age groups?
I forget their ages.
I mean,
or was that the first baby or not?
So most of them, it was not their first baby.
Okay.
Most of them were mothers of more than one child. I want to see these skewed a little older. Like I don't have the demographics table in front of me, but I believe they skewed a little bit older. Like they were like around 30.
Yeah.
But
I think that's right.
Yeah.
No, I was wondering because of the experience of already having a child and feeling comfortable than either sharing or giving their milk. It seems logical to be more comfortable than my first child, and I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know the process. I don't know if I have enough milk, all the different inquiries that you might have as a new mom.
Yeah, no, that was certainly the case.
And there was definitely some like continuity across children, right? In ways that we didn't necessarily expect. And so maybe like with someone's first child, they struggled a little bit with breastfeeding and they needed milk. And so they received from someone. And then with the next child, they had more success at breastfeeding. And so then they became a donor. So other studies had also really dichotomized donor and recipient. And we found that there was really quite a bit of overlap. Like even people who more casually, shared childcare. There's also more cross nursing than would have been expected. About like 20% of our participants engaged in cross nursing at some point in their milk sharing journey.
Yes.
I was wondering, as part of your ethnographic study, if there was a point that you went, like totally surprised on something that occurred that you were not expecting. Because I like to see how research takes a turn.
So any surprises?
And recover from that turn.
I mean, I don't know if this was a surprise, but we did the survey and we got back, this data that kind of reflected this very kind of affluent white sample. And, and that's kind of the idea that we had in our heads of who this community was. And then we started recruiting interview participants. And, I don't have the data in front of me, but I do feel like a lot of the people we interviewed didn't necessarily fit this mold of the idea that we had of who a milk sharing participant was. So like there was a woman I interviewed who, like, her story just is always on my mind because she was, well, first of all, she was young. She was like 19, and she was working at a gas station when she gave birth. And so certainly not like this idea of this affluent kind of milk sharing participant, but it was this young woman who was a single mom who had 2 weeks of maternity leave, if you can call it that, a baby who had a 10-day NICU stay, who desperately wanted to breastfeed her daughter and went to incredible lengths to do it. I mean, she would drive out hours. She drove all over Florida in search of milk for her baby. And I interviewed her in her home, and I remember how like she opened up her freezer and she showed me her stash of milk, and she was just kind of beaming with like this sense of accomplishment because she was able to feed her baby only human milk. And this was, incredibly meaningful. And so, I don't know that that was necessarily kind of a surprise, but it was a really good example of how, like, we can see one picture in the quantitative data about who people who milk share are, and then you can see something quite different qualitatively.
I like that. I wish my students will hear that.
Definitely. I would say that I think the biggest surprise for me was really how much these participants wanted their stories to be heard. I mean, we were surprised at how many participants we got, and our online survey was quite long. So these are mothers of babies, right? Like taking the time to do this, 100 question. Of course, there was skip logic and things like that. But, they would take this survey, and to have 392 people complete it, we had about 500 people start it. That was just, and we didn't know them. They were sharing it with each other. So they would take it and then send it to their networks and then share it to private groups that we weren't a part of. And the same thing when we went to recruit participants for the interviews, they shared it. And I think in some ways that's how maybe we wound up with sort of a different demographic, because it was in a particular county group that, do you remember that when, it was sort of being shared in this particular group a lot when we were recruiting more of the interview participants. And then in some of our early publications, we did get a lot of press, and the news, the newspaper articles, the clips from a Fox News segment, those were shared over and over and over by the participants among each other in their group. So they're just so excited to have their stories heard. And I mean, that's really what you want, right, out of a feminist project, is people who want to be researched and want to have their story out there. And
there was a lot of enthusiasm around the project, and
of course, because it's a very touchy topic. It's ladies, I do not know if you're going to continue that project, but I want to give you maybe an interesting information, and I know that as a fact because I have a lot of my friends who has grandchildren or were born not so long ago. Maybe during that COVID, it was happened in a couple of my friends, like grandchildren. And what we do have in Russia, we have in drugstore, the mom can take the mother's milk only if the doctor prescribed it. So it's not like you go and just take it, buy it. only by the doctor's prescription, and really doctors, the doctor should write why he thinks that this baby or this mom should buy that milk. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's interesting for you, but maybe to continue that research, maybe you want to do like something international thing. So just, you know, just a thought.
Yes, no, that's super interesting. We actually have, I mean, it's not exactly regulated because it's not actually regulated by the government, but it's sort of a self-regulated human milk banking system in the United States. And so that milk is only accessible with prescription from a physician, and that milk tends to be the majority of it goes to NICUs because extremely medically fragile babies have much higher rates of survival on human milk than on formula. And so one of the things that's really interesting is kind of seeing like milk banking practices and internationally as well. And I wasn't familiar with Russia, but I know, for instance, that Brazil has more human milk banks per capita than any other country in the world. And so it's really,
it's an interesting research. I appreciate your sharing. So great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask the winners of the 2019 Gloria Anzaldúa Research Award to tell us, to inspire the audience to apply? Or what should they do? I mean, why should they do it?
Well, I mean, I would say, first of all, I think it's brilliant that you're focusing on funding late stage projects.
Great.
Because there are so many mechanisms to support seed projects and, you know, preliminary data collection, trying to get something off the ground, with the assumption then that those are going to get larger scale funding to bring them to completion. And for projects like, I don't know, breast milk sharing, the NSF and NIH are not all that interested in, you know, we're not likely to get bigger funding. And so to have an award that is just for late stage projects, I think is amazing, because you do encounter those sorts of monetary needs near the end that, you know, that are unexpected.
Yeah, so you can ladies, you can spend the money for the conference, for example, to go to the conference or not? Or what else?
Yeah, I believe so. We didn't use our money for conference travel, but I believe it has been used that way. Especially for meeting with like book editors and presses. I do, like, I mean, I'm sure MC can correct me if I'm wrong, but I sat on the selection committee before, and I believe we selected someone to travel to conference for, I believe specifically for like networking with editors, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Yes, you can do that.
I kind of lost my editor, my publication lady who was planning to publish my book. She was sick with COVID, and she just from the publishing, nobody is in charge of that Slavic part of in this publishing house. So I'm kind of like very upset. Like,
Oh,
Yes, the worst.
It can also, the award can also cover book tours. So in case you are needing to travel to present your paper or present your book, or even present in a conference, now that we are allowed to travel, yes, these can also be used for that, particularly if the paper is done and finished with. But
yeah, the book is almost done. I mean, you know, it depends of course on the publication, you know, committee, but you know, I worked with one, and then she just like, I understand that the COVID is kind of hitting, but I mean, I felt so upset about that.
yes, as you know, we didn't give this award last year on 2020 because it was a very unusual year, and we couldn't even concentrate. But hopefully in this time, by December 14th, we'll get some applicants and we can help two faculty. And remember, it's all ranks. So spread the word. It doesn't have to be a tenure earning. It doesn't have to be a full professor. It could be an assistant professor, an instructor, any level of instructor or lecturer. because I think that it's valuable what everybody does, really.
Oh, yeah.
at the end of
Oh,
the
yeah.
day.
Definitely.
Obviously, if you have a content that it's dealing with gender and dealing with women, it's also a great asset for us, but it doesn't matter. We're extremely open to research. It doesn't have to be, it could be, hard sciences for that matter. Or theater.
No, I'm not going to do hard science for sure.
Are you gonna do language or are you gonna do culture?
Culture. Yep.
That's perfectly fine. That's completely interdisciplinary. And so are we.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. You're great. Congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Cecilia Rodriguez Milanes, who is the inspiration for this series. And she is really not able to be here today. That's why I'm filling in for her, but we need to acknowledge her. And I want to thank again our panelists for today's presentation, Dr. Reyes-Foster and Dr. Shannon Carter. I love that you work across disciplines. Although you're in the same college, I really encourage that. I love it. I love it. Congratulations. And I wish you the best of luck. And please spread the word about the Anzaldúa Award. I will send another email to our affiliates, and remember, share it with a friend. And if there's somebody in campus that should be an affiliate, email me so I can find that person. But I really appreciate the time that you have given us today and the fact that we have an audience members. Thank you. I know it's a difficult time of the semester. We're all grading like crazy.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Maria, for
coming.
organizing.
And thank you for inviting us to do this, MC.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Maria is great. She's always great.
I
She
hope
knows the people whom to invite, right, Maria?
I hope you have a good afternoon, and thanks again. Congratulations on your research, and bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Well,
Thank
thank you.
you.